just want to kind of start on the national level. And, when you kind of look at, obviously votes are still being counted, but you look at where a lot of these county by county breakdowns went, and they all leaned more Republican than they did in 2020. What do you kind of make of that?
Yes, that's true. We sometimes think of politics as a zero-sum game, right? You may win certain counties, but end up sacrificing other counties, right? So you do better in suburban or rural areas, but you don't do as well in the cities. Or if you look at counties that have higher education levels, you may do well, but what about counties that don't have a large number of adults with college education? Maybe you don't do as well there. One of the striking early findings, we should be clear about that, striking early findings from last night is that Republicans, in particular, the presidential candidate Donald Trump, was doing very well across a whole variety of counties, racially diverse, ethnically diverse, counties that were younger, counties that were older, counties that were rural, counties that were suburban and urban. We're seeing a movement, at least in this election, rightward from where those counties were even in 2020.
Yeah, what do you think that shift means kind of for the future
Hmm.
of politics?
There was a big question coming into last night about how much the general dissatisfaction pertaining to the economy, pertaining to the direction of the nation, would end up cashing out. I think we now see how it cashed out, right? You have a large majority of Americans reporting that they are dissatisfied about the nation's direction. You have a large number of voters who came out and said that their primary issue was the economy, and they thought that Donald Trump would do a better job leading in the economy. There are still concerns about inflation. There are concerns about the cost of gas and the cost of groceries. And I feel like the incumbent president's unpopularity really weighed down Kamala Harris. This is something that she was unable or unwilling to run away from. Right? She couldn't make a clean break from what has become a historically unpopular presidency.
I want to ask you about Illinois because for me, I know there's still some votes kind of being counted there, but it's so interesting to look at Illinois where she is only leading by 8 points. In the last three elections, it's been 16.9, 16.8, 16.9, like all the
Yeah,
exact same.
yeah.
What do you make of what happened in Illinois?
Yeah, so Illinois experienced something that actually occurred across the country last night, which is it's not just that red states continued to vote red and that battleground states voted red. It's also that some of these dyed in the wool blue states, right? These reliably Democratic states made huge shifts to the right. You brought up Illinois. I was also looking at New Jersey, right? Here is a state that consistently the Democratic presidential candidate wins by 10, 15, 20%. And Kamala Harris likely will win it by single digits. Minnesota, right? The home state of the vice presidential nominee for the Democratic Party, Tim Walz. Kamala Harris is going to win Minnesota by a small number, right? Single digits as well. Here in Illinois, we've seen a similar process in place. This just points back to the broader trend that you highlighted earlier, which is a nationwide movement to the right. It occurred in red states, it occurred in purple states, it occurred even in blue states.
Um, Turning to Iowa now, what do you make of it? Looks the first district race is so close right now, but what do you make of Scott County turned red, which it hasn't done in as long as the data I can look at. But it looks like Scott County is splitting the ticket, voting for
Hmm.
Trump and Christina Bohannon. What do you make of that?
Hmm. This is something that both of the parties had their eyes on last night. How much split ticket voting would we see? Right. And Democrats hoped in some key states that there'd be a good deal of split ticket voting, right? They were worried about the incumbent Senator Sherrod Brown in Ohio. They were worried about the incumbent Senator John Tester in Montana. They hoped that there would be some split ticket voting there, maybe even steal a seat in Texas. The average Texan may be voting for Donald Trump, but not voting for Ted Cruz. We didn't see those sorts of dynamics. However, if you come back to Iowa, the, the Iowa first is such a uniquely divided congressional district. Going all the way back to 2020, we focused on this just in the tenure of the current representative, Miller Meeks. Razor thin margin in 2020, does better in 2022, but that's also a midterm election, so we don't see as much turnout. We're back in a presidential cycle, and it is tight. It's very tight. He's currently in the lead. But let's be honest about the Iowa picture in general. This is not Iowa of 20 years ago. The Iowa of 2016, 2020, 2024, it looks pretty red. There were questions about how well Donald Trump would do, right? There was conflicting polling around how well he would do in the state. It looks very likely he's going to win the state by double digits. It looks very likely that every single representative coming out of the state of Iowa is going to be a Republican, just as was the case 2 years ago, right? So yes, we are in a very competitive district, but if you look statewide, the state is still red state as it relates to state elections and also national elections.
I want to talk to you more about that in a sec, but what do you think maybe the appeal would be splitting your ticket for
Hmm.
Donald Trump and Christina Bohannon?
Hmm. That's a good question. So I'd be interested to look at some of the exit polling, in particular for this congressional race. What are the types of topics that Bohannon was able to meaningfully differentiate herself from the incumbent congresswoman while still not necessarily attacking Trump to the degree that a voter who was a reliable Trump supporter didn't feel that they would second guess having to vote for Bohannon as well, right? That's a challenge. I will note if you were to look at some of the materials that the Bohannon campaign put out during this election cycle, if you were to look at their TV ads, if you were to look at their mailers, if you were to even to go to Bohannon's website, her campaign website, it's striking the kind of issues to get prioritized. These are not the sorts of issues that would have been prioritized by a Democratic candidate 10 years ago or 20 years ago. You can see the rightward pressure on the Democratic Party in competitive races like these. There's a lot of talk, for instance, on the border and securing the border, support for law enforcement, right? Ensuring that she's not attached to the left wing or the more socialist leaning wing of the Democratic Party, doing everything in her power not to be closely attached to Joe Biden or even Kamala Harris, right? These are steps that a candidate is making, consciously making, so that they are not too closely tied to a brand that they think would hurt their candidacy.
What do you think looking at Iowa? Because it used to be such a battleground state. And in the
Mm-hmm.
last 3 years, it's gone very red. And Trump is now overperforming kind of where he did in the last two election cycles. Where do you think the Democratic Party in Iowa goes from here in
Mm-hmm.
terms of appealing to the voters and campaigning and all of that?
I think this is the sort of autopsy report that many Democrats, both at the national and state level, are going to be doing over the next few years, especially over the next 2 years before the 2026 midterm elections. The Democratic Party spent a lot of money, in fact, hundreds of millions of dollars on abortion advertising nationwide. The hope was that this would be a poll. It could pull over moderate voters, it could pull over erstwhile Republican voters. I wonder if they're going to start to diversify their portfolio and try to tap into even more policy topics that they think the Republican Party has been winning on in recent years. I I think that ceding the populist ground to the Republican Party so much over the past 8 years may be rethought. And I wonder if we're going to see more of an intentional effort by the Democratic Party, both the Iowa Democratic Party, but also the National Democratic Party, to try to win back working class support and to focus on some of these economic topics that actually poll very well across the spectrum.
Those are probably about all the questions I had for you. Anything else you wanted to mention?
Now, I suppose the last thing I should be very clear about is it was a good night for Republicans, not just as it related to the White House, but also as it related to the Senate. And it's still going to be some time before we know the final composition of the House. This is one of those areas that Republicans felt like they were on the defense coming into last night, but there's still a distinct possibility that the Republican Party leaves this election cycle with unified government, which is absolutely remarkable because how neck and neck the Senate was, the House was, and also the fight for the White House has been.